good, John.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to CHRS's first, what we're calling Hints and Kinks Live. It's actually tips and techniques by our members and people who want to share radio repair and restoration stuff with us. We hope to do more of these, and this should be fun. Our first presenter is Chris Potempa, and he's going to be talking about some capacitors that he builds.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody here, for having me and giving me the time to lay all of this out before you. I'm currently an electrical tech for Caltrain, but at various times in the past I've worn the hat of machinist. So with that in line, what I'm going to present to you today are my attempt at essentially reproduction electrolytic capacitor housings. I've been online, and in the past I've seen where people will attempt to restuff these old capacitor housings, and I've never really cared for the idea of taking a Dremel tool and then cutting it at the bottom, and then you open it up and then pull all the guts out and then restuff it, and then taking a piece of tape, like shiny aluminum tape, and covering it back up. To me, that always just looked a little hokey. I've always thought that, ideally the best way is to either just, leave the original in place, and it's structurally, it's still sound. One of the things that I'll do is when I'm upending a chassis is, I see this as a handhold. I can grab onto it. If it's been restuffed and it's got the piece of tape, you can't do that, along with, anybody else that comes along down the road. Anyways, so I've run into situations in the past where when I pick up a project, I've run into mismatched capacitor housings. For instance, I have a Hammerlin Comet Pro. It's got a bank of 4 of these. Everyone is mismatched. And instead of trying to restuff them or put in new capacitors underneath, I've taken a look at it and I thought, geez, it's just such a simple shape. It's basically just a tube, with threads, at one end, and it's closed at the other end. And how hard could it be to make, something like this? So, fortunately, I have a lathe and also a milling machine, and all of this can be done entirely on a lathe. If you're fortunate enough to have access to one, even just the smallest little benchtop lathe, you can make these. Aluminum is it's very forgiving. It's very easy to machine and screw up. I made all of these. I didn't even use any kind of cutting fluid. And you can see that they came out pretty nice looking. I would say that the two essential differences with making these that differ from the original is you can see from the outside that visually they're really the spitting image of the original, but the difference with mine is that the tube walls are just a little bit thicker, and I had to do that in order to accommodate internal threads. And then also, mine has, you can see that the cover it's removable. So imagine this as being your chassis top, and underneath, and you have your leads going to it, and so you can unscrew the cover and then put in whatever value capacitor of your choice, and then just cover it back up. And let's say 10, 20 years or whatever down the road, when that capacitor starts going bad, shows leakage or whatever, then you just unscrew it and solder in a new one, and you're good to go. So this is infinitely reusable, and you didn't have to make any kind of cuts, and you didn't have to tape it up. And also, the per unit cost of it's really very reasonable. I got the metal tubing and the bar stock, not this size of course, but something that's more appropriate to the diameter of this. I got it online from a company called onlinemetals.com, and if they do have a minimum order, it's very reasonable. It's something like $10 or $20 or whatever. And the shipping is also very reasonable as well.
If you know a machine shop in your neighborhood, you always drop in, and they usually have some small pieces they'll sell you too. You know, for a shop of that kind.
So that's,
The end cap.
what's that?
How do you make the end cap?
Oh, good question.
Could you repeat, everybody repeat questions, please, for the
How
audience?
do you make the end cap, the piece at the top here?
Yeah. What I did was, so normally it's as a tube, it's just open like this.
Yep.
And I bored it out so it was nice and smooth. And then I fitted, I made with the bar stock, I machined it so it was about 1/1000th of an inch larger than the bore.
Okay.
And then I use a press fit. If you have a benchtop vise and it's big enough, you can press it in that way. Small arbor press, hydraulic press, whatever.
C-clamp?
Yeah, C-clamp will work just as well as.
Bag and put it in a freezer. And wait a half an hour and then. Okay.
So it was a press fit, and then I pressed it down, and a little portion of it was left still proud of the surrounding tubing, and then in the lathe I just faced it off, and then by getting creative and using things just like commonly available, router bits, and let's say a Dremel tool if you want to tweak the contours a little bit, then I put this in the lathe, and that's how I was able to get, these faux crimped edges, and so this is one example. And also when you face it and then when you polish it, you cannot see the seam anywhere. It completely polishes out. And also because it's an interference fit, it's in there so tight that you'd have to take hammer blows to remove that plug to get that out of there. So that's an example of a crimp. Here's another one. And here's another one as well. Now, if you're restoring something like a $5 Crosley find or some other 30s cheapo radio, going to this extent, it's definitely, it's not going to be worthwhile. But possibly if you have something higher end, a higher end set, something of historical value, maybe something that's very sentimental to you. It came up, through the generations in your family, and you really want to fix it up right, then possibly you'd want to use one of these. Also, again, if you have a high-end set and maybe it came to you, and where the electrolytics used to be, you're just looking at a bunch of empty holes. Well, again, instead of trying to come up with, originals, then, here's one idea, one alternative.
Do you attempt to reproduce the labeling on the can?
Could you reproduce repeat the question?
As far as labeling on the side of the can, I would leave that up to, whoever is making these. For myself, I think, for instance, on a high-end set like, the Scotts and McMurdo Silvers, I haven't looked, again, too closely at the radios that are out there in the foyer, lobby type of thing, but I don't think they have any paper labels on them. So if I were making these for sets like that, I would probably, use these as drop-in replacements, but I go one step further by taking them to a chrome plater and having them plated, and then you really have something that just looks like $1 million and it's done up right. But for something, a more run-of-the-mill set that had the paper labels, I would just go to, an office supply store and get some self-adhesive, type of label, but in some sort of an off-white color, maybe, like a sepia color. Or I think I read online somewhere that somebody took that sort of paper and they took a sponge, dipped in a cup of tea,
Yes.
and then wiped it across the paper, and that tints it in order to give it that old, aged look. So.
Chris, thank you very much. Very informative.
You're welcome.
How much money can you store in one of those things?